always find the autumn is a really tough series. Normally, obviously the 4 games, 4 weekends on the bounce against, obviously, you know, and especially from our autumn, it's as tougher autumn as we've ever had. So, whereas with the Six Nations, you kind of get your 2, you know, your 2 big weeks of games, then you get a week to just, you know, nurse a couple of injuries or rest a couple of boys and get the niggles back. Whereas this autumn is just so tough in terms of back-to-back 4 Saturdays in a row, and it really tests your body and your squad.
How are you, Biggs? You're looking fit. Let's start with that. Not just by looking at your arms, by watching you play.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty good, mate. Pretty good. I've had a little bit of a bad back over the weekend with playing on Friday night, but I think that's just a couple of little bit of old age kicking in, Jim. You know what it's like when you get into your 30s. But yeah, I'm all good, mate. I'm really good, actually.
Well, what if you got a sore back? Why are you tapping and going and smashing into forwards close to the try line?
Yeah, that was probably the big bit. I think I was trying to counter ruck at one point, and then I felt my back jar up a little bit, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm a 10 year. I'm a 32-year-old 10, and I really need to assess my sort of choices in games at that point. So it was a bit of a challenge over the weekend with the little one getting back up and off the floor and things like that. But all good, mate. All good.
Let's go back a little bit. What was the Lions tour like? I mean, obviously we're all passing judgment over here, but we're also looking at it with you guys over there, the biggest stage of your careers, playing against the world champions. There's no fans. What was it like? Like, I mean, I know it is a bit of old news, but...
No, it very much, the best way, when people, because obviously people have asked, and the best way I feel like I've answered the question is it didn't feel like we were on a Lions tour. It felt like we were just playing for the Lions team, if that makes sense. It felt very much just like you were, just playing for, a very, very special team, but it felt like you were just playing for a team as opposed to it being the real sort of experience and the real tour that it should be. So that was disappointing, and I think I just think it we managed to grind a result out in that first test, and then it kind of just got the second test got away from us, and then obviously the third test was a couple of decisions here or there, or a couple of different calls here and there, and it changes. But I really enjoyed the group. The people were really good. There was a really good group of people on tour, but it's just so difficult when you can't get out and about, even small things. You know what it's like, Jim. Just going for a coffee or going for some dinner in the evenings or whatever. It just breaks the weeks and the days up, and it just felt like we were, just a little bit sort of stuck, which we were, and I think that probably just had a bit of an effect, like you said, with the crowds and things. It was a difficult period, and it was difficult to manage for the management side of it and for the players. But disappointing way for it to finish. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it still looked class. The games on TV, I thought the level of rugby and how competitive it was and how close all the games were. Yeah. I wouldn't say there's been a bit of backlash, but there's been a lot of opinions that have come off the back of that tour about how the Lions should have played. In hindsight, they should have taken it to South Africa. They kicked the ball too much. Players have come out and said it, which is, it's arguably the new age of modern professional sport. And, I wouldn't say Gas has been left out to dry, but it seems like there's been a bit of backlash towards him from kind of within the camp. Like, what are your feelings on that? I mean, you've worked with Gas. You'd have an idea of how you'd want to play against South Africa.
I think it's so... we're in such a results business, aren't we, in terms of professional sport? And I think it's just like we didn't do a huge amount different in the first test than we did the second test. Now, everyone seemed to say after that first test, the Lions have done really well to come from behind and grind the result out against a tough South African defence. Whereas the second test, things were very similar in terms of the game, but we just didn't quite kick on in terms of after building up a decent lead in that first half. And we, you know what it's like, Jim, as a player, as a team, whatever it is. If you've played to your potential or if you've fired enough shots and you've done enough to win a game, don't you? And and we know that we knew in that second test we didn't, was the bottom line, and there's no getting away from that. So as a whole, we have to accept that people are going to have those opinions when we don't get a result off the back of perhaps not playing well enough or firing enough shots. But I think it's really unfair. I think Gats is, you know, Gats gave me my first cap. He's pretty much given me all of my caps apart from the last maybe 7 or 8 or whatever it is. And it's so dependent. Like, you know, there was the third test in Australia when the boys played, you know, they lost the second test, but then came out and fired some shots in that third. If that goes a different way, then again, it's just so different. It's so difficult to analyse, and we're in such a results business. And Gats was actually really good on that tour in terms of, you know, how we managed to keep everything quite positive, even though we know we didn't fire enough shots, was the bottom line. So, but I think everyone's wise after the event as well, aren't they? In terms of, you know, when you watch games back or when you watch other teams on telly, you always, you know, you never really make too many mistakes when you're watching other teams and things. And it was frustrating. There's no doubt about it. It was frustrating not being able to fire or not play to probably the potential that we had in the squad. But sometimes, you know, when you play a good side as well, and there's not much space and room in the international game, then sometimes you just come up against a good side as well. If you look at how good South Africa's defensive record is and how they're a team very similar to sort of out of the Saracens mold, I suppose, Jim, in terms of what they want to do is they want to apply pressure through they're a team who don't particularly want possession. They'd much rather apply pressure through territory and try and squeeze you at set piece. So from our point of view, we were sort of, the principles were, well, we don't want to concede any cheap points or any cheap possession or turnovers in our own half. And we want to try and then be a bit more positive when we cross the halfway line, I suppose, when we can be a bit more, a bit more positive. And it didn't, you know, in that first test, we did that quite well. In the second test, we didn't do it well because we didn't cross the halfway line enough. And probably on the few times we did, we were probably a little bit cautious and thought we could maybe just sneak a result and kick a few goals, which didn't happen. So from our point of view, it's very much respecting how good a team South Africa are, and I know that Australia had a couple of bits of success against them in the Rugby Championship in terms of they moved the ball well, and I think there was definitely probably a balance which we maybe could have adopted, and I think it's you're wise after the event as well. And you know, that third test could have gone either way, couldn't it? It was enough, you know, there's not much in it, and if we get across the line, then probably me and you are having a very different conversation than we are right now, aren't we? So it's and I think you have to say, it's like South Africa against, you know, everyone keeps, you know, and rightly so, we keep lauding how good New Zealand are, but South Africa, the last time, you know, they beat New Zealand the last time, and they probably should have beat them the week before as well, in terms of, apart from Jordie Barrett's, you know, last minute kick. So when you look at the success that South Africa have against New Zealand over the last couple of years, you have to say that, you know, it's not as if we're playing a Mickey Mouse team either. You know, we're playing a proper team who apply pressure, and in international rugby, very, very rarely do you make a mistake in your own half and get away with it. Whereas club rugby, you can probably make 2 or 3 in your own half and get away with it and recover and not get punished.
When you watch rugby, it's interesting, you're talking about the All Blacks and the insight on South Africa. South Africa, for me, just naturally, the way that I enjoyed the game, the way that I played the game is probably quite similar, on a very lower level, obviously, to the South African world champions. But New Zealand play an exciting brand and perceive that they run everything. They've obviously got a great kicking game. Like a couple of years ago, they had the highest kicking stats of any team, which people wouldn't think. When you watch them two teams and a team like Australia, is there any one that you pick out where you love watching the way that they play?
I think if you look at someone, when you look at, say, South Africa have got, like we just said, they've got a very, their style is their plan A is their plan B is do plan A better almost. You know what I mean? So that's their style. But if you look at someone like a Richie Mo'unga, for argument's sake, when he plays, I think what he has in his game is a real good balance in terms of lots of little attacking kicks, a run threat in terms of, and then obviously a pretty slick pass. And so for me, he looks like when I watch him play, or when you watch these games on telly, he looks like he's got makes good decisions on the ball, and I think that's key, and varies his game up nicely. And I think that's something that that I've been working really quite hard with in terms of in Northampton, especially with Sam Vesti and Chris Boyd, and that's what we're trying to just develop in terms of having a real balance to our game. And I think if you talk, and you mentioned there, Jim, about New Zealand having a really good style of play and managing to get results. I think that's what we if you look at the Six Nations just gone, I think it was the most, for a team winning the championship, it was the most tries scored by a team ending up winning the championship. So from that point of view, we kind of ticked all the boxes by playing fair, quite an attractive brand of rugby, but also winning games as well. And you compare that, say, to the 2019 Grand Slam we won, and we played so much more rugby and better rugby in that 2020, the 2021 Six Nations. But no, it goes back to that results business, because if we'd have lost all of those 5 games and not played brilliantly and not played a huge amount of rugby, we'd have come under a huge amount of pressure. But because we managed to get results and we were in a habit of winning, it's very much a different conversation, and we ended up winning the Grand Slam with probably a bit to spare as well, to be honest, in the end. But yeah, I'd say someone like Mo'unga is a really good example for any sort of young 10 coming through, having a look at the balance in his game against good opposition.
Yeah, absolutely. Another good 10. He's getting all the headlines at the minute, and he was called up to the Lions tour, as Marcus Smith. I know everyone in the media, poor Faz, got asked about him and about how good he is. But I think a lot of people looking at this, and you're standing in the game, and the fact that you are playing in the Premiership and Harlequins play a really good style of game, is he as good as everyone's making out, or are people just getting carried away because, again, you've been in that position? Finn Russell, when he was coming through, the excitement builds around these young lads to build them up, then bring them crashing back down again. Is he as good as we're making out? Yeah,
I think he may as well enjoy himself while things are good, because I'm sure throughout his career he's going to have a few ups and downs. But I think what I actually saw a comment that Owen said, actually, and he's got all the X factor in the world, isn't he? In terms of, but he actually understands the game really well as well, and wants to learn and get better at sort of running the team instead of just doing the fancy bits and pieces which grab headlines. So there's no doubt that he's going to be an absolute superstar of the game, and he's got all the skills. We've got on really, really well with him on tour. Actually, one of the nicest blokes you could come across, and fitted in really well, and obviously played really well in that Stormers game as well. So I think he's got he's going to be. It'll be exciting to see how England go with him and what they decide to do. If they decide to chuck him in, then he's more than ready. That's the bottom line. I think we're all in agreement with that, and I think he's got a huge amount of potential. And like you said, I hope that he just focuses on because international rugby is very much about doing the basics pretty well, and a lot of what else all your fancy stuff will develop when you do the basics well. So I think it's about doing those bits right first, and he's got a huge future in the game, and he's going to be knocking around for a long time after I'm hanging up my boots. I can assure you of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk around the game that you won't be playing at the weekend, Wales versus the All Blacks. Yeah. I'd be quite interested to see, if you were playing, how do you approach a game like that? And I say that, you boys winning the Six Nations.
Yeah.
How do you beat a team like the All Blacks, Biggs? Because you look at the way that they play and the kind of form of the players that they've got, and I say this from a Scottish perspective, there's some teams that can't beat them. They just be like, right, the All Blacks are in town. Like, we ain't going to beat them. So when you look at Wales now, with the squad that they've got, guys like yourself, Lewis Rees-Zammit can't play, what do they say in the lead up to it? Is it about winning the game, or is it about performance?
No, it's definitely about performance. It tends to lead to a result as well. But we have to. We know that we're very much underdogs going into that game, and New Zealand are coming off the back of obviously almost like a warm-up game last weekend, and the back of the Rugby Championship. So the team they've named and the strengths across the board, just it's pretty frightening when you look at that. But also, I think it's almost a little bit like we as a country, and we always seem to do so well when our back's against the walls and we get written off. And I think that'll be a lot of what's been going on in camp over the last couple of weeks, is that nobody's given us a chance. And I think it's about making sure that we build a really start the game really well and do I think the big focus will be the basics, because if you don't do the basics against New Zealand, then you've absolutely had it. If you don't do the basics against a lot of teams, you have to, your set piece has to be solid, your kicking game has to be solid, and your defence has to be solid. So those three things will be what they have worked on. But you have to, probably from everyone looking from the outside, it probably looks like a foregone conclusion. But I think what we've got a lot. If you look at say our starting team, I know we're missing a few. I know obviously we're missing a few players, but there's still a huge amount of quality in that side as well, who can cause serious trouble for the All Blacks. But admittedly, we're going to be huge underdogs. But I think it's just about making sure, like you said, Jim, the performance level has to be, when you play. There's like you said, there's some teams where if you're anything below probably getting out of the top draw, you're going to come off second best. And I wouldn't, and that's what I would say to that. I certainly wouldn't say that New Zealand or the All Blacks are in town. That it's just we'll move on to the next week and things like that. But I definitely agree that when they're in town, unless you get probably 13 or 14 of your players, playing 8 or 9 out of 10, you're going to come off second best. There's no doubt about
that. Gareth Anscombe, a load of headlines around him this week. Naturally, been out, horrible injury. How good is it to get him back and have him as an option, and obviously competing for your position as well? It'll probably bring the best out in both of you.
Yeah, I've been in constant touch with Gareth over the couple of years, and it's really tough, isn't it? When you get touch wood, I've been lucky not to have too many serious injuries over the years, but you have to just feel, I think it was at one stage really touch and go whether he'd make it back. And I know that he's had so many sort of dark days recovering or from operations and training, and so it's great. It shows the courage and the character of Gareth to make his way back. And I think he'll just be really glad to have been named in the squad initially, and then to start, just to go out and express himself and get that feel back. And I'm really pleased for him, actually, because again, he's a quality operator who we managed to find a really good combination with previous to the 2019 World Cup, and I hope that he can get himself back. And I'm sure it'll take probably this season to really get himself back after such a long time. And but Gareth's the type of player, and the qualities he has to be able to overcome that and get back to full speed pretty quickly.
Can you imagine the feeling for him facing the Hacker, having had the 2 years, during a pandemic, and emotionally and everything, second guess yourself up in there with long-term injuries, to actually be stood there in the Principality in a sellout, like the emotion, it was just going to be phenomenal for him from where he's been with that injury,
Yeah, 100%. I just think it's those are, after all the dark days he would have had and all the tough training sessions and days watching games on his sofa and things like that. I think that moment there will be, the bus ride in from the hotel into the stadium. Those moments would be what will be, we'll say it was worth it. All those dark times. So I am really, really pleased for him, and I hope he goes well, because, like you said, you can't imagine being out for that long, and probably in his darkest times, probably thinking these days wouldn't happen again. So it's great to see it back, and like I said, I hope he goes really well. He's certainly not been thrown back in gently to international rugby on the weekend, but like I said, he's got enough quality to deal with that, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just look forward to some games you potentially might be involved in. Obviously, we don't want to look too far ahead, but more from Wales's perspective, playing against South Africa, your experience having played them, what are you expecting? Faf de Klerk's obviously injured. He's probably a headline one for them in terms of what he brings to that team. But what do you make of this South Africa team? Because it's quite a tough tour for them, isn't it, coming over to Europe? A lot of them say that, having played a lot of rugby, obviously, against New Zealand and Australia over the last few months.
Yeah, I don't expect, again, South Africa and this is meant in the biggest compliment way I can give them. They're not a difficult team to analyse or to know what's coming from them, but being able to stop it and, like we said, and not try and play, or they want to force you out of your game as well. So I think from our point of view, we will certainly know what's coming from a South African point of view, but it's how we can, and it's what we've been working on in terms of our style of play, certainly from the Six Nations and on Saturday now. It's how we can put our game on the park, and I think we have to just be bold and put our game on the park rather than trying to think that how South Africa, because we know that South Africa aren't going to change. So it's not about trying to be too fancy or whatever. We've just got to try and put our game on the park and apply pressure through our game. And if that's not good enough on the day, then we can look at reasons why in afterwards. But I think it's going to be a really exciting game, like you said, de Klerk, and I think Colby's out as well, isn't he, for the game? So that's it's a positive for us.
Positives.
Yeah, a couple of positives for us, which would be great. But you look at who they're probably going to bring in terms of Mpimpi and Reinach, who obviously I know pretty well, and they just got such strength and depth as well. So it's going to be tough. And then you look at, say, the autumn. I always find the autumn is a really tough series. Normally, obviously the 4 weekends on the bounce. Against, obviously, and especially from our autumn, it's as tougher autumn as we've ever had. So, whereas with the Six Nations, you kind of get your two big weeks of games, then you get a week to just nurse a couple of injuries or rest a couple of boys and get the niggles back. Whereas this autumn is just so tough in terms of back-to-back 4 Saturdays in a row, and it really tests your body and your squad.
Yeah, because when you look at the makeup of your games, you've obviously got 2 huge games naturally in the All Blacks and South Africa. And then you've got Fiji, who notoriously have been a tough game for Wales for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Is that sometimes a harder game because, no disrespect to Fiji, because you're up there with the All Blacks, you're up there with South Africa, and it's almost naturally, because you don't know the Fiji players, it's harder to get yourself up emotionally for them games. I say that from experience. But even that game becomes more difficult because of the way they play. They're impossible to analyse. Yeah.
I've actually seen today that the roof's going to be open for all 4 games as well. Because normally, whenever Fiji are in town, we bring them into the stadium, we close the roof, and give them a nice dry day to chuck the ball about. So that hopefully it'll be chucking it down whenever we play Fiji. But I think you expected to beat Fiji, but I've said openly the 2 toughest games I've played for Wales are, in terms of physically and digging in, were against Fiji. We played Fiji in the 2015 and 19 World Cup, and it was honestly physically they just challenge you in ways that perhaps other teams don't, with the athletes and the pace and the power that they've got across the whole team. So it will be, we know that we're going to have to put a huge amount of energy into the first couple of weekends to get what we want. But then you kind of look at the Fiji game as a chance to maybe rotate a few boys in or swap the team. But it really, I feel like that the Fiji these days, that isn't the case with them. And you look at Fiji, Japan, teams like that, you have to be at your best to get results against that. And that's why I say the autumn is so difficult, because it's just, you don't get a down week to really sort of switch off or be at sort of 60-70% and get a result. So it's always more difficult when you play those teams, because you're expected to win, but some of the talent that they've got and some of the athletes in that side means that it's very, very often just turns into the game that you want to play, and it often becomes quite loose, which tends to suit those types of teams.
Yeah, well, I've got you, Biggs, on this point. Again, Fiji are a team that I love to watch. Why are they not competing? I know Japan, you put kind of Fiji in Japan. I can arguably say that Japan may be a leapfrogging Fiji now because of their basic skills and some of the stuff they do around the contact area. Where are Fiji lacking, do you think? Because they've come over. I mean, I'll let you answer it instead of me waffling on.
Yeah, no, I think it's you look at the individuals that they've got as in their squad and when they put a team out, and it's scary, really, isn't it, in terms of what they can put out and what they can field. But again, it's a little bit like they tend not to get a huge amount of time together, and they tend not to get a huge amount of time playing against, like for us now, we've got 4 games against 4 top oppositions, which means that we're going to get better, hopefully be a better team at the end of the autumn than we were at the start. Now, Fiji don't get as many opportunities and they don't get as much time together. And, like the England boys are away this week, so they've got an extra week's preparation ahead of the Tonga game. The Wales boys have got, Wales and Scotland have got that extra week preparation. So, those Fiji haven't got that. And I think it would be, it'd be frightening to see them if they had as much preparation time and all that as well to go with it. And I think that's ultimately what it is, because they're a team of supremely talented sort of individuals who probably just don't get as much time. And you can see, when they do get a bit of time and they can cause, like they did in the World Cup, they caused us and Australia huge problems, and were games that could have gone either way. But I'd say that they just need a bit more time together, and they're probably at a bit of a disadvantage compared to teams like ourselves, England and Scotland, and teams who get a bit more time together.
Yeah, absolutely. And then lastly, Australia, last but not least, a team that are now back up there in the top 4 or 5 teams in the world. What's impressed you about Australia, and what kind of worries you about them coming over with their new management team and everything they're doing behind the scenes?
Whenever we play Australia in the autumn, Jim, they're always like on a bit of a downer, and then they play a few games and come absolutely rolling into town in Cardiff, full of confidence. I think we put them in the Hilton in Cardiff. They got walkabout in Cardiff, ready to go after the game. So I think they always find another level when they come to Cardiff. But they've done really well because they were obviously they were struggling a little bit at the start of it, weren't they? And then they've just found some really good form, picking up a couple of good results against South Africa and Argentina. And I think they just, again, the longer they've been together, and I know that Dave Reddy's been working on different style and new players and some younger guys coming through. The more time they get together, like every team, they're gonna improve week on week. And that chapter, it's going to be a really difficult game for us coming off the back of 3 really tough games as well. So I think all the games are exciting, but Australia again will look to play some pretty expansive rugby, and I think that could turn into, with the way that both teams want to play, could turn into a really special game on that Saturday. And it's just about trying to make sure that, again, I keep going back to it, but we've got to try and put our game, and I think we've fallen into the trap a little bit before, trying to alter things a little bit for who you play, and there's always got to be that element. But I think the biggest thing that I've tried to approach personally and in teams I've played in is let's try and get our own house in order and put things on them as opposed to worrying too much about what the opposition are going to bring and things like that. We know Australia are going to be strong over the ball. We know that they're going to bring some intricate backs moves, and they're going to be good in the air in terms of kicking to compete. So it's just about working those little bits as opposed to your whole game changing because of who you're playing, sort of thing. So I hope that, like I said, I think the crowd are going to get full crowds back in the Principality. I think they couldn't have picked a better autumn for getting full crowds back, and I think it's going to be some great rugby on show.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan Biggar, thank you very much. Class as always, class act, especially big game at the weekend, a big series coming up. So good luck for obviously Northampton, but Wales as well. It's been a pleasure again, mate.
Thanks, mate. Cheers, Jim.
Thanks, Biggs.